My daughter's two ex-boyfriends started dating each other. Then they both proposed to her. I didn't see this coming, so I've got something wild to share that I've been holding on to for a while now, and honestly, I still can't quite wrap my head around it. My daughter, 23F, has been in a bit of an unusual situation for a while. To give a little background, she's been close with these two guys, J, 24M, and S, 23M, pretty much her whole life. They've all grown up together, and for the most part, I've known them since they were kids. Jay was actually my daughter's first serious boyfriend back in high school. After they broke up, she started dating S, and though both relationships eventually ended, they all managed to stay pretty close. It wasn't long after that when Jay and S started dating each other in college. Now, I've got no problem with anyone's sexual orientation, to each their own, but I won't lie. The whole dynamic was kind of odd to me. I mean, having two people share an ex and then start dating each other, it's just not something I was used to seeing. But like I said, I'm not here to judge. Anyway, about a year and a half ago, my daughter sat her father and me down for a conversation that I did not see coming. She told us that she was in a relationship with both Jay and S. Apparently, this wasn't some casual thing either. She explained that she's always loved them both, and the feeling was mutual. Jay and S had been open with her about still having feelings for her, even after they'd started dating each other. And now, the three of them are a thing. At first, I didn't really know how to react. Polygamous relationships aren't exactly what I'd imagined for my daughter, but I told her the most important thing is that she's happy. If this works for them, who am I to stand in the way? Here's where it gets even crazier. Just last night, she calls us all excited after coming back from a trip with Jay and S. She tells us that the two of them proposed to her. Together. Yep, both of them, at the same time. And she said yes. I did my best to congratulate her, but I'd be lying if I said I didn't feel conflicted. Dating is one thing, but marriage? I'm trying to keep an open mind, but it's hard not to feel like this is a little out of left field. I've heard of open marriages, but a three-way marriage just feels strange. I don't know if it's my age showing or what, but I'm definitely struggling with the whole idea. Update 1. It has been a few weeks since the situation with my husband's behavior after our trip to my home country, and things haven't gotten any better. After our initial argument, I hoped that time would allow him to reflect on his actions and see how hurtful they were. Instead, it seems like he's been actively avoiding any meaningful conversation about it. Every time I try to bring it up, he either brushes me off or gives some half-hearted apology that feels more like he's trying to shut me up than genuinely address the issue. What hurts the most is that I've come to realize this isn't just about the trip anymore. That situation opened my eyes to a much deeper problem in our relationship. His lack of respect for my culture and, by extension, for me. The more I think about it, the more I realize that this isn't the first time he's dismissed something important to me. I've just been too focused on making our relationship work to see it. For example, there have been countless small moments over the years that I brushed off at the time, but now stand out as clear signs of his lack of cultural sensitivity. When we first got together, I remember mentioning how important it was for me to maintain some of the traditions from my home country, especially when it came to raising a family. He would smile and nod, but anytime I tried to have a serious conversation about it, he'd get uncomfortable or change the subject. At the time, I chalked it up to him needing time to adjust, since our backgrounds were so different. But now I see that he was never really interested in learning about or embracing my culture. Things have gotten particularly tense since his parents' recent visit. They came over for dinner last weekend, and the topic of our trip came up again. His mom made some offhand comment about how interesting it must have been for my husband to experience a completely different way of life. And he just laughed. He didn't mention anything positive about the trip, didn't talk about how kind and welcoming my parents were, or even the fact that they went out of their way to make him comfortable. Instead, he joked about how overwhelming the city was and made a snide comment about how so many people were walking around everywhere. I felt humiliated sitting there, listening to him completely misrepresent my family and the experience. His parents, of course, ate it up. They've always been a bit judgmental, especially when it comes to things they don't understand. So they took his comments as validation of whatever preconceived notions they had about my home country. I wanted to speak up, to defend my family and set the record straight, but I felt frozen in place. It was like no matter what I said, they wouldn't believe me. They'd already made up their minds, and my husband wasn't doing anything to correct their assumptions. After his parents left, I confronted him again. I told him how deeply hurt I was by the way he spoke about my family and my culture. He looked at me like I was being overly dramatic and told me that I was taking it too personally. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. How could I not take it personally? This was about my family, my heritage, my identity, and he was treating it like it was some trivial thing that didn't matter. I told him that I didn't feel like he respected me, and his response was to roll his eyes and say, "Here we go again." And that's when I realized that this wasn't going to get better. He wasn't going to suddenly wake up one day and start appreciating my culture or my family. He wasn't going to stop making dismissive comments or belittling my feelings. And as much as it broke my heart, I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't stay in a marriage where my husband didn't respect me, where he saw my background as something to joke about rather than something to be proud of. I spent the next few days in a fog, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to believe that maybe, if I explained things in a different way, he would finally understand how hurtful his behavior was. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. I had already explained myself multiple times, and he still didn't get it. Or worse, he didn't care. Finally, after a lot of soul-searching, I decided to take a break. I told him I needed some time to think about our relationship and what I wanted. He didn't fight me on it. In fact, he seemed relieved that I was leaving, which hurt more than anything else. It felt like he was happy to be rid of the responsibility of dealing with my feelings, like he was glad to have an excuse to avoid the uncomfortable conversations we'd been having. I've been staying with a friend for the past week, and in that time, I've come to a painful realization. I don't think our marriage can be saved. The issues we're facing aren't just about cultural differences. They're about fundamental values and respect. I deserve to be with someone who values all parts of me, including my heritage, and I don't think my husband is capable of doing that. Since I left, he hasn't reached out much. He sent a few texts asking if I was okay, but there was no real concern behind his words. It was more like he was checking a box, doing the bare minimum to avoid feeling guilty. I haven't responded to most of his messages because, honestly, I don't know what to say. I'm still processing everything, trying to figure out how to move forward. I've been talking to my parents about what's been going on, though I haven't told them the full extent of the situation. I don't want to worry them, but at the same time, I know they sense that something is wrong. They've been incredibly supportive, telling me that they trust me to make the right decision and that they'll stand by me no matter what. It's comforting to know that I have their support, even though it breaks my heart to think about how much my husband's behavior has hurt them too. Right now, I'm leaning towards separation. I haven't made any final decisions yet, but I know that I can't stay in a relationship where I feel disrespected and unheard. I've tried to have open, honest conversations with my husband, but he's either unwilling or unable to engage with me in a meaningful way. I deserve better than that. I deserve to be with someone who values me for who I am, not just for the parts of me that are convenient or easy to deal with. And then I'm going to take some more time to think about my next steps, but I'm starting to feel more at peace with the idea of moving on. It's scary, but staying in a marriage where I don't feel valued is even scarier. I'll update again when I've made a decision, but for now, I'm focusing on healing and finding the strength to put myself first. Update 2. It has been a few more weeks since I last updated, and things have gotten even more complicated. After staying with my friend for some time, I finally returned home, still unsure of what my next steps would be. I was hoping that maybe, just maybe, some time apart would have given my husband the opportunity to reflect on everything that's happened. I thought he might finally take my concerns seriously and show some understanding, but unfortunately, I was wrong. When I walked into the house, it didn't feel like I was coming back to my home. There was an unfamiliar coldness in the air, as if the space had grown distant from me while I was gone. My husband greeted me with a short hug, but it felt more like an obligation than a gesture of love. I could tell right away that things were still off between us. He didn't seem interested in talking about what had happened, and when I asked how he had been doing, his responses were vague and dismissive. I decided to take a different approach this time. Instead of confronting him right away, I asked if we could sit down and have a calm, honest conversation about everything that had been bothering me. To my surprise, he agreed, though I could see from the look on his face that he wasn't exactly enthusiastic about it. We sat down at the kitchen table, and I laid out my feelings once again. I told him how disrespected I felt by the way he talked about my family, how hurtful it was that he downplayed my culture, and how his lack of empathy had made me question whether we even had a future together. His response left me stunned. He said, "I'm sorry you feel that way, but I'm just being honest about how I see things." He went on to explain that he didn't think it was his responsibility to embrace or appreciate my culture because, in his words, "I married you, not your family or your traditions." He said that while he respected the fact that my heritage was important to me, he didn't feel like he should have to change his perspective or behavior just to make me happy. Hearing him say that was like a punch to the gut. I had always believed that marriage was about mutual respect, compromise, and growing together, but it was clear that he didn't share that belief. He wasn't willing to meet me halfway, and he didn't seem to care that his indifference was driving a wedge between us. I asked him if he even wanted to work on our marriage, and his response was chilling. "I don't think there's anything wrong with the way I see things. If you have a problem with it, maybe that's on you." I felt like I had hit a brick wall. No matter how much I tried to explain my perspective, he just didn't seem to get it. Or worse, he didn't care to. I realized that I had been holding on to the hope that he would change, but in that moment, it became clear to me that he had no intention of doing so. It was like he had already checked out of our marriage, and I was the only one still fighting for it. That night, I called my parents. I hadn't wanted to involve them in our issues, but I needed to talk to someone who could understand what I was going through. I told them about everything: how my husband had disrespected them, how he had dismissed my culture, and how he had been cold and distant ever since our trip. My mom was heartbroken. She had always thought of my husband as a good man, someone who would take care of me and respect our family's values. Hearing how he had treated me, and by extension them, was devastating for her. My dad, on the other hand, was furious. He couldn't believe that my husband had shown such blatant disrespect for our culture and our family's hospitality. He told me that I deserved better, that I shouldn't stay in a marriage where I wasn't valued. His words hit me hard because deep down I knew he was right. But the thought of ending my marriage still felt like an impossible decision. I wasn't ready to give up on everything we had built together, even though it was clear that my husband wasn't putting in the same effort. Over the next few days, I tried to focus on myself. I continued seeing my therapist, who helped me unpack a lot of the guilt and self-blame I had been carrying. She reminded me that my husband's behavior was not a reflection of my worth, and that I had every right to demand respect in my relationship. I started journaling again, writing down all the things I had been holding in for so long. It was cathartic, but it also made me realize just how much I had been compromising myself for the sake of keeping the peace. One day, while I was at home, I overheard my husband on the phone with one of his friends. He didn't know I was listening, but what I heard made my stomach drop. He was talking about me, telling his friend that I was making a big deal out of nothing, and that I was overly sensitive about everything. He even joked that maybe I just needed to get out of my feelings, and that all this cultural stuff was getting old. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything we had been through, he was still making light of my feelings, still refusing to take me seriously. I confronted him as soon as he got off the phone. I told him I had heard everything, and I asked him why he thought it was okay to talk about me like that behind my back. His response? He shrugged and said, "I'm just being real with my friends. It's not that deep." That was it for me. I couldn't take it anymore. I told him that I was done, that I couldn't stay in a marriage where I was constantly disrespected and dismissed. He didn't even try to stop me. He just sat there, staring at me with that same indifferent expression, as if he couldn't care less about the fact that I was walking away. It was heartbreaking, but also liberating. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing up for myself, like I was finally choosing to prioritize my own happiness and well-being. I packed my things and left that night. I've been staying with my parents for the past week, And while it's been hard to come to terms with the end of my marriage, I know that I made the right decision. My family has been incredibly supportive, reminding me that I deserve to be with someone who respects and values all parts of me, including my culture. I've started the process of filing for separation, though I haven't decided if I want to pursue a full divorce just yet. Part of me is still holding on to the idea that maybe my husband will have some kind of epiphany, that he'll realize what he's lost and try to make things right. But the more I think about it, the more I realize that I can't wait around for someone who isn't willing to change. I need to focus on myself, on healing, and on rebuilding my life without him. I'm not sure what the future holds, but for the first time in a long time, I feel hopeful. I know it's going to be a long road, but I'm ready to take the first step. Update 3. I wish I could say things had gotten better since my last update, but unfortunately they haven't. In fact, the situation has become even more complicated, and I'm now faced with decisions I never imagined having to make when I first married my husband. After my time away, I returned home again, determined to have a final conversation with my husband about our future. I wanted to believe there was still hope for us, that maybe we could find a way to bridge the growing gap between us. But that hope faded the moment I walked through the door. When I got home, my husband was sitting on the couch watching TV like nothing had happened. He barely acknowledged my return, offering only a half-hearted, "Hey, how was your time away?" I sat down beside him and told him that we needed to talk, but I could tell by the look on his face that he wasn't interested. It was like he had already checked out of our marriage, and I was the only one still holding on. I asked him straight up if he still wanted to be married to me. His answer, or rather his lack of an answer, hit me like a punch in the gut. He didn't say yes, but he didn't say no either. Instead, he just shrugged and said, "I don't know. Things have been tough lately, but I think we can work it out if you stop being so sensitive about everything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After everything we had been through, after all the hurtful things he had said, he still thought the problem was with me being too sensitive. I told him that I wasn't willing to sweep everything under the rug anymore. I explained again how deeply his words and actions had hurt me, how his dismissive attitude toward my culture and my family had made me feel like an outsider in my own marriage. But once again, he brushed off my concerns. He said I was overthinking things, and that I was making a big deal out of nothing. He even went so far as to say that I was the one causing problems in our marriage by constantly bringing up the same issues. That was the moment I realized there was no saving us. I had been holding on to the hope that he would see how much pain he had caused me, that he would finally acknowledge his mistakes and make an effort to change. But it was clear now that he wasn't willing to do that. He didn't see anything wrong with how he had treated me, and he wasn't interested in putting in the work to fix our relationship. I told him that I was considering leaving, that I didn't see a future for us if things continued this way. His response was cold and dismissive. He said, "If that's what you want, then go ahead. I'm not stopping you." There was no emotion in his voice, no sign that he cared whether I stayed or left. It was like I was talking to a stranger, not the man I had married. That night, I packed a bag and left again, this time knowing that I wasn't coming back. I went to stay with my friend once more, and over the next few days, I started making arrangements to move out permanently. I didn't want to drag things out any longer. It was clear to me that my husband had already emotionally checked out of our marriage, and I wasn't going to waste any more time trying to fix something that was beyond repair. But just as I was starting to come to terms with the idea of divorce, something unexpected happened that threw everything into chaos. A few days after I left, my husband called me out of the blue. His voice was shaky, and I could tell right away that something was wrong. He told me that his parents had found out about our problems, and they were furious. At me. Apparently, my husband had told them his version of events, painting me as the unreasonable one who was blowing everything out of proportion. He didn't mention the hurtful things he had said about my family or his lack of respect for my culture. Instead, he made it seem like I was the one causing drama over nothing. His parents had taken his side completely, and now they were demanding answers from me. His mother called me shortly after, and the conversation that followed was one of the most painful and frustrating experiences of my life. She accused me of abandoning my husband for no good reason and said that I was being selfish for putting my feelings above the marriage. She even implied that I was trying to punish him by leaving, rather than working through our issues like a proper wife should. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It was clear that they had no idea what had really been going on, and my husband had done nothing to set the record straight. I tried to explain my side of the story, but it was like talking to a brick wall. His mother didn't want to hear it. She kept insisting that I was in the wrong, that I needed to apologize to my husband and go back home. She even went as far as to say that if I didn't, I would be ruining his life and that I would regret my decision to leave. The conversation ended with her telling me that I needed to grow up and stop being so dramatic. After that call, I was shaken to my core. It was bad enough that my husband hadn't supported me, but now his entire family was turning against me as well. I felt like I was being ganged up on, like my feelings didn't matter at all. My husband had completely thrown me under the bus, and I realized that if I stayed in this marriage, I would always be the villain in his family's eyes. And I spoke to my parents about everything that had happened, and they were incredibly supportive as always. They told me that I didn't owe anyone an apology, and that I had every right to leave a marriage where I was being disrespected. Their words gave me the strength I needed to move forward with my decision to file for divorce. I reached out to a lawyer the next day and started the process. It was a difficult decision, but I knew it was the right one. I couldn't stay in a relationship where I was constantly being belittled and dismissed, and I couldn't continue to sacrifice my happiness and well-being for someone who didn't value me or my culture. Since filing for divorce, I've been focusing on healing and rebuilding my life. It hasn't been easy, but I feel a sense of relief that I haven't felt in a long time. I'm finally putting myself first, and I'm no longer trying to force a relationship that was never going to work. As for my husband, he hasn't reached out to me since I filed. I guess that's not surprising, given how things ended. His parents, however, have continued to send me messages, trying to guilt me into reconsidering my decision. They've even gone as far as to accuse me of being ungrateful for everything their son had done for me, which is laughable considering how little respect he showed me and my family throughout our marriage. I've blocked their numbers and cut off all contact with them. I'm done being made to feel like the bad guy in this situation. I know my truth, and I'm standing by my decision. I deserve to be with someone who values and respects me for who I am, not someone who tries to change me or make me feel small. Right now, I'm focusing on my own healing and growth. I'm reconnecting with my roots, spending more time with my family, and rediscovering the things that bring me joy. It's been a long and painful journey, but I'm finally starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm hopeful that it will be better than the past. For the first time in a long time, I feel free.